Let me ask you something. When was the last time you truly befriended a child? Not to teach, protect, or supervise, but just to listen, to play, to be there. Sometimes, all it takes is one quiet moment, one gentle gesture, to reach a soul that's been hiding away. And today's story, it starts with a birthday party, full of cake, candles, and polite smiles, but ends with something far sweeter, a friendship that asked for nothing, and gave everything. If you believe that a little kindness at the right time can change a lonely heart, hit that like button. Where we bring you true stories that prove one thing. Goodness is still out there, waiting to be seen. Now, let me tell you what happened at Table 7 in a quiet Italian restaurant in Boulder, Colorado. The restaurant was the kind of place where the napkins were folded into perfect triangles, and the music was soft enough to hear your own thoughts. Golden candlelight danced on polished cutlery, and a white frosted cake with 9 candles sat untouched at the center of Table 7. Victor Olcott, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, checked his watch as a waiter refilled his glass. 63 years old, with silver-streaked hair and a reputation that made grown developers nervous, he wasn't used to sitting still. His phone buzzed once. He didn't answer. Instead, he glanced sideways at the small boy seated at the far end of the table. Eli Olcott. 9 years old. His only son. Eli didn't speak. Not today. Not in the past 6 months since the accident. The crash had left his left side paralyzed and his words locked behind invisible walls. His head tilted slightly downward, hands resting limp in his lap. The wheelchair he sat in had birthday streamers taped along one wheel, a hopeful touch from someone who still believed today might be happy. Victor shifted in his chair as 2 business partners chuckled over wine. They toasted Eli, who didn't lift his gaze. Victor raised his glass with them, but his eyes drifted again to his son. There was a look there, something between guilt and helplessness, that didn't belong to a billionaire. Eli hadn't touched the cake. He hadn't looked at the presents. The room was filled with polite cheer, but at that table, silence was louder than anything else. Then she arrived. Sierra Lane balanced a tray of plates with quiet grace as she approached Table 7. She wasn't part of the regular waitstaff, just filling in for someone who called in sick. 26 years old, recently hired. Her apron was a little too crisp, her hair pinned up with the kind of care you gave when you wanted to be taken seriously. But there was something in her eyes, something soft, observant, that didn't miss much. She walked around the table with the practiced ease of someone used to going unnoticed. But when she reached Eli, she paused. Instead of setting the plate in front of him from above, the way most people did, she crouched slowly until she was eye level with him. Her movements were unhurried, almost reverent. She didn't say a word. From her apron pocket, she pulled out something small, a paper doll, carefully folded, with tiny jointed arms and legs made from napkin rings and tape. It wasn't store-bought. It wasn't anything special, except it was. She placed the doll gently on Eli's plate and whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "He's been looking for a captain." Eli blinked. His fingers twitched slightly. Sierra didn't wait for a response. She offered a warm, steady smile, nodded once, and stood. No fuss. No fanfare. Just a waitress doing her job, except she wasn't serving food. She was offering something else. A moment passed. Then another. Eli's right hand, slow and unsure, reached for the paper doll. He turned it over in his palm, his eyes following its uneven edges. And then, as if something softened inside him, as if a wall cracked just enough, he smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't long. But it was real. Victor saw it. He'd been watching. Not just the doll, not just his son, but the way this young woman had approached him, not as a patient, not as a problem, but as a person. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His eyes lingered on Sierra as she disappeared into the kitchen, already moving on to another table. But something had shifted. For the first time all evening, the silence around Table 7 didn't feel heavy. It felt full. Sierra returned to the kitchen without fanfare, the soft click of the swinging door closing behind her. She leaned against the counter for a second, staring at her own hands. Something about that boy. The way he held that paper doll, like it was the first thing in a long time that didn't ask anything of him. "Table 7 needs refills," her manager called. "Got it," she replied, already moving. When she came back out, she passed table after table of birthday songs and steak orders and candlelight anniversaries. But her eyes were drawn back to Eli. Not because he needed anything. Not because he'd asked. But because he hadn't. She made her way over with a pitcher of water, checking glasses, adjusting cutlery. Then quietly, without a word, she walked around and sat right down on the floor next to him. It was a deliberate choice, not a dramatic one, not attention-seeking. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't reach out or coo. She simply crossed her legs like she had at the children's center where she used to volunteer, pulled a clean napkin from her apron, and began folding. Eli turned slightly, watching. Her hands worked slowly, with care, creasing the edges into a pointed bow. Then she folded again, forming the base. A small paper boat began to take shape. "I used to make these during rainy days," she murmured, not quite looking at him. "My brother and I would float them in puddles and pretend they were real ships. He always wanted to be the captain." She finished the last fold, pressed the corners to hold their shape, and gently placed the boat on the edge of the table in front of Eli. "But today," she said, looking up at him with a smile that didn't try too hard, "I think I want to be the captain. Would you like to be the navigator?" Eli blinked. She waited, not expecting, not pushing. Then slowly, he nodded. Sierra smiled again, this time with a small exhale, as if something inside her relaxed. She didn't cheer. She didn't call attention to it. She simply took the paper boat and slid it a little closer to his plate, as if anchoring it in his safe harbor. Around them, the restaurant moved on. Victor was still seated among colleagues, making occasional polite comments, swirling his wine. But his eyes were no longer on the conversation. They were on his son. He watched Eli's fingers reach for the paper boat. Watched Sierra pull out another napkin and begin folding a second one, this time letting him see each step. She didn't guide his hands. She didn't correct him. She just folded next to him, side by side, as if they had always done this. And Eli, he didn't flinch. He didn't shrink back. For the first time in months, he didn't look small in his chair. He looked like a boy, playing quietly with a friend. Victor leaned back slightly, the corners of his mouth unreadable, his hands still folded tightly in his lap. But his eyes, usually cool and calculating, held something else now. Something warmer. Quieter. One of the guests leaned toward Victor and asked something about a zoning deal. He nodded absently, his gaze still fixed on the scene beside him. Eli let out a tiny laugh. Just a breath, really, a little puff of air that escaped as he turned his boat upside down and pretended it had capsized. Sierra dramatically gasped, covered her mouth, and said, "We're going to need a rescue team." Eli pointed to the sugar packets. She nodded solemnly. Affirmative. Deployment in 30 seconds. They played like that for 10 more minutes, two quiet souls in a loud world, lost in the kind of imagination that doesn't need words. When Sierra stood up to check on another table, Eli looked up and watched her go, not with fear, not with confusion, but with the quiet trust of someone who had just found a small anchor in a storm. Victor saw it all. And he said nothing. The last guests filtered out slowly, coats draped over arms, gift bags swinging gently by their sides. Waiters cleared the plates, scooped up half-melted candle wax, and reset tables for the dinner rush to come. Table 7, once filled with polite noise, now sat quietly beneath the dimmed chandelier. The birthday cake had only 2 slices missing, one from a guest, the other finally, and almost shyly, eaten by Eli. Victor stood near the window, his hands behind his back, watching the twilight settle over Boulder. From where he stood, He could see the reflection of his son in the glass, not slumped or distant, but leaning forward slightly, still fiddling with a paper boat Sierra had left him. Sierra returned with a tray full of dessert plates, balancing them with the tired ease of someone nearing the end of a long shift. She didn't expect to be spoken to. Most high-end clients rarely addressed servers directly, let alone with warmth. But Victor turned toward her just as she passed. "Excuse me," he said. She stopped. There was a pause. Not long, but enough to register that this man, who looked like he rarely hesitated, was searching for the right words. "You know," he said, eyes narrowing slightly, "my son hasn't spoken to anyone in over 6 months." Sierra didn't blink. She nodded once, softly. "I know," she replied. "The hostess mentioned it earlier." Victor studied her, the steadiness in her voice, the absence of pity. He tilted his head. "And yet, he smiled at you," he said. "He played." Sierra's hands were still holding the tray. She didn't shift her weight. Didn't fidget. "I didn't try to talk to him," she said simply. "I just sat where he could see me." Victor looked down for a moment, then back up. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. It was almost imperceptible, like a door creaking open in a long-abandoned room. He didn't offer thanks. He didn't ask for an explanation. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, cream-colored business card. The weight of the moment wasn't in the card itself, it was in how he handed it to her. No ceremony. No speech. Just a quiet extension of his hand, as if to say, "You did something I couldn't." Sierra glanced at it. Victor Olcott. Olcott Holdings. She didn't know much about real estate, but the name alone carried a gravity that even she could feel. She took the card carefully, as if it might break if held too tightly. Victor gave a single nod. Then, before she could thank him, he turned and walked back toward his son. But Sierra stood there for a moment longer, staring at the card in her hand, not quite sure what had just happened, only that something had. At the table, Eli looked up at his father. Victor crouched beside the chair, stiffly, uncomfortably, like someone unused to being at eye level with a child. He didn't say anything at first. Just looked at the small boat on the table, the paper figure tucked next to Eli's juice cup. He picked it up, turned it over once in his hand. "Did you make this?" he asked. Eli didn't speak, not yet, but he nodded. Victor looked at him. Really looked. And in that moment, what he saw wasn't a diagnosis or a limitation. He saw his son. The boy behind the silence. The one he hadn't reached in 6 long months of doctors and specialists and speech therapists. And all it had taken was someone who didn't try so hard. Someone who simply sat where she could be seen. Victor placed the paper figure back on the table and stood. From across the room, Sierra watched him walk away with Eli's wheelchair beside him. She didn't expect to see either of them again. But something inside her said, "This is not the end." The call came the next morning, just as Sierra was tying her apron before her shift. "Mississippi Lane," a voice said, crisp and professional. "This is Rebecca from Mr. Olcott's office." Sierra blinked, switching her phone to her other hand. "Yes, this is Sierra. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Victor Olcott. He was very moved by what you did for his son yesterday. He would like to invite you to their home." There was a pause, the kind that held more weight than words. "Not for work," the woman clarified gently. "He's asking if you'd come, as a friend to Eli." Sierra didn't respond right away. She thought of the boy's small fingers folding paper. Of that cautious smile. Of how long it must have been since someone simply played with him. She hesitated. "I'm not sure I'd be much use. I'm not a therapist or anything." "You helped him more than most professionals have," the voice replied kindly. "Mr. Olcott just thought Eli might like to see you again." Sierra looked down at her apron. At the faint crease where she'd kept that extra napkin boat, just in case. "I'll come," she said. Later that afternoon, a car pulled up outside a sprawling estate nestled in the foothills outside Boulder. The gate opened without a word. The house beyond was all glass and silence, modern, beautiful, but strangely cold. Sierra stepped out cautiously, holding nothing but a paper bag with 3 fresh napkins inside. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from something quieter. Responsibility, maybe. Or the quiet pressure of being invited somewhere not out of obligation, but out of trust. A butler greeted her at the door, led her through polished hallways that echoed with every step. No photos on the walls. No toys scattered on the floor. Just pristine quiet. Finally, they reached a sunroom that overlooked a manicured backyard. At the far end, a small wooden deck extended toward a still reflecting pond. And there, moving slowly, determinedly, was Eli. He was steering his wheelchair on his own. No nurse. No aide. One hand worked the wheel, the other held something white in his lap. A napkin boat. Sierra didn't say anything at first. She just stepped out onto the patio and walked toward him, letting her shoes crunch gently on the stone path so he'd hear her coming. Eli turned his head slightly. His eyes met hers. And for a moment, they just looked at each other. "I brought more," she said softly, lifting the paper bag. Eli's lips curved, just barely. Then he motioned, slowly, carefully, toward the edge of the pond. They sat side by side, not speaking much. Sierra folded another boat. Eli unfolded his own, trying to copy her creases. A quiet breeze moved through the trees, lifting the corners of the napkins in her lap. When she set the first boat on the surface of the pond, Eli leaned forward, watching as it drifted gently out across the still water. "You know," Sierra said, not looking at him, "my brother and I used to race them. We'd blow on them from the dock." Eli looked at her. Then with effort, he leaned in close to the water and gave a small, awkward puff of air. The boat wobbled forward. Sierra grinned. "You're a natural." From the window above, Victor stood watching. He didn't say a word. Didn't take a photo. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the boy who hadn't left the house for anything voluntary in 6 months, now pushing himself toward the sun for a boat made of napkin folds and friendship. The sun had already begun its descent when Eli and Sierra sat beside the pond again, their shoes dusted with dry grass, their shadows long against the manicured lawn. Sierra was folding yet another paper boat, slower this time, letting Eli follow the creases one by one with his good hand. He was getting better. Not perfect, but steadier. The kind of progress that didn't show up in charts, but meant everything. "Hey, Sierra," Eli said suddenly, his voice soft but clear. She looked up surprised, not just by the words, but by the confidence in them. "Yeah. Do you have a dream?" Sierra blinked. "A dream?" He nodded, looking back down at the boat he was still working on. She smiled and sat back on her hands, letting the breeze play with her loose strands of hair. "Well," she said slowly, "I guess I do." He glanced at her, waiting. "I've always wanted to go back to school," she said. "To study pediatric rehabilitation. You know, help kids like you get stronger, braver, better." Eli looked thoughtful. "Why haven't you?" Sierra hesitated, then laughed quietly, more to herself than him. "Because dreams cost money," she said. "And waitressing pays rent, not tuition." She tried to say it lightly, like it didn't matter. But something flickered in her eyes that betrayed the truth. It mattered. It mattered a lot. Eli didn't respond right away. He simply turned back to his paper and finished the final fold in silence. The next morning, Sierra heard the doorbell ring as she was tying her hair up, getting ready for another shift. She opened the door to find no one there, only a medium-sized envelope on her front step, thick and carefully sealed, with no return address. Curious, she brought it inside, sat down at her small kitchen table, and gently peeled it open. Inside was a packet of papers, official, embossed, and very real. She recognized the university logo before she even read the first page. Congratulations. We are pleased to inform you that your application has been approved. Her hands trembled slightly. She hadn't applied. Not yet. She flipped to the second page, a financial statement. Full tuition, covered. Living expenses, estimated and accounted for. Scholarship status, confirmed. Beneath it all, tucked inside a linen-textured card, was a letter. Handwritten. Careful, deliberate strokes. Sierra. I've spent most of my life fixing buildings, not people. I know how to pour foundations, how to raise glass towers from steel. But I don't know how to rebuild a boy's spirit. I didn't know how to reach my son. And then you did. Without training. Without being paid. Without any reason but kindness. Yesterday, for the first time in 6 months, Eli got up before me. He waited by the window with a boat in his lap, asking when his friend would come again. I cannot make him walk. But thanks to you, he's beginning to live again. You once told him your dream, almost like a joke. But I don't think it was a joke. I think it's something the world needs. I think Eli knew that too. So consider this not a gift, but a return. From the boy who got his childhood back, to the woman who gave it to him. Victor Olcott. Sierra read the letter twice. Then a third time. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from something deeper. Something like recognition. Like someone finally seeing not just what she had done, but who she wanted to become. She looked up at the window, where the morning sun was pouring through the glass in wide golden bands. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel stuck. She felt chosen. The coffee shop still smelled the same, roasted beans, warm pastries, a faint touch of cinnamon in the air. But something was different. Sierra walked through the front door, not in a waitress apron this time, but in a soft blue blouse and tan slacks. Her name tag didn't say server. It said, intern, pediatric rehabilitation. She had come back, not for a shift, not to take orders, but to meet someone. Someone waiting in the same corner booth where everything had quietly begun. The owner greeted her with a warm smile. We miss having you on the floor, he said. Sierra returned the smile. I'll still stop in. But I think I've found the thing I'm really meant to do. She turned toward the far corner. There, at the end of the room where sunlight poured through the windows, Eli sat at the table, a stack of napkins in front of him and a pen in his hand. His wheelchair was parked neatly beside the bench, which he now transferred to without hesitation. He looked more confident now, not loud or boisterous, but steady. There was a calmness about him, the kind that came from being seen and understood. As Sierra approached, he glanced up and smiled. Hey, Captain, he said softly. She laughed. I thought you were the captain. He shook his head. You always were. He handed her a small napkin boat, carefully folded, perfectly balanced. On the sail, in neat handwriting, were the words, Captain Sierra, thank you for steering me away from lonely harbors. Sierra didn't answer right away. She sat across from him, her fingers tracing the edge of the tiny sail. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Instead, she looked at him and said, You helped me steer too, you know. Eli gave a small shrug, then smiled wider. From across the room, near the doorway, Victor stood in silence. He hadn't approached, hadn't said anything. Just watched, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding a takeaway coffee he hadn't touched. But this time, when he saw his son leaning forward with joy, when he saw Sierra sitting not across from a patient, but beside a friend, when he read the words on that little sailboat, he smiled. Not the tight, polite smile of business meetings. Not the formal nod of a man who just approved a multimillion-dollar deal. It was a real smile. Unrestrained. Grateful. Quietly full. And for once, he didn't try to hide it. If you believe that the right friend, at the right moment, can work quiet miracles. Leave a like to let others know kindness still matters. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that reminds us all. Sometimes the smallest gestures change everything.